Hey everybody, my name is John from American Eagle Plumbing. Today's little project is we're going to be replacing this tankless water heater right here behind me and going to kind of talk through what those steps are and how that looks. Hope you enjoy this video. Let's get after it. First step in replacing a water heater is going to be to make sure you turn off the water supply to the water heater as well as the gas before you start disconnecting. So a lot of times there's a service valve underneath the water heater. We're going to turn that off. But before we got up here, I shut the water off to the house, and I've already kind of drained down the system. So there's not going to be a whole lot of water from underneath the tank, but it's always a good idea to have a little bucket just to make sure he catches anything that's still in the heat exchanger of the water heater. Now that heat exchanger is like in this area, and that's where the water heating actually takes place. But let's go shut the gas off. So the gas shutoff valve on this appliance is way over here by the furnace. That's this red handle right here. So we're going to just turn that into a quarter turn where it's facing up. Now the gas is off, so we can disconnect the gas line. When we reinstall this water heater, we're going to be adding a separate gas shutoff where it's closer to the appliance, because by code it does need to be within 6 feet. And this little run here is over 6 feet of piping. So when we reinstall the water heater, we'll be adding a shutoff valve that's closer to the appliance so that it can be easily found. We're going to be shutting off the water. So there's a couple different water shutoffs up here. This is a quarter turn for the water. So we'll shut the cold water supply off. That's going to be your water feed and all your water pressure. So once we shut this off, water pressure is gone. We've already bled down. We've opened up a faucet below, so everything's kind of already drained down. So there shouldn't be a whole lot when we disconnect this. But we're going to cut this gas line, and then we're going to remove some of this insulation and expose the water piping so we can cut it. And so that's really the next step. We've already disconnected the power, unplugged it, so the unit's unpowered, so there's no harm. So we're going to now disconnect these unions. There's some service valves, so we'll be replacing these valves with the new unit. It's always a good idea to replace the service valves because those get calcified, and sometimes there's like a ball valve, and sometimes that ball valve doesn't close all the way just over time from use. So whenever you replace a water heater, always a good idea to replace the other components that are sitting right in the general area, I guess, of the new tank. So we'll just start it and start exposing some of these water lines because we'll probably need access to them. And this insulation is just in the way. So we'll just set that in a bucket. These are just unions, so they should just on spin. Here's the hot side. Grab my bucket and throw it underneath there. You ever have one of those buckets where like they don't want to go? It's like you need Hercules strength just to pull it out. Almost the case. That is good. We'll disconnect this TMP right here first. Get some of this stuff out of the way. Get this out of the, all right, there we go. That's loose. Disconnect that cold line. We'll come back and then I'll show you how to disconnect this thing from the wall. Now that we have our hot and cold disconnected, I still need to disconnect the gas because we're going to add that extra gas valve. I'm not gonna on-thread all of that piping that you saw when we shut the gas off, but instead I'm just gonna cut it here, and then we'll replumb the gas from this point to the new spot with a new valve and probably a union so we can easily disconnect it. So I'm just gonna go ahead and zip this off with the Sawzall so I can disconnect it. All right, so everything's all disconnected from underneath. We'll be unthreading these, like I said, and replacing them. But the thing that holds this water heater to the wall, there's 4 screws. There's 2 down here, and then there's 2 above there. So we're gonna take out the screws on the bottom, and then take out the screws on the top and hold it, and it'll come loose, and we'll just take it off the wall. And it'll slip. There's a venting, but that venting will just disconnect once we unscrew those top screws. So I'll just get in here and remove the screws, set those aside because we'll probably end up reusing them. All right, there's the bottom 2. Let's go do the top. So right here is the screw that I was hanging, that I said was partially in the 2x4, and there's this hanger right here. So it slipped in through that opening, and this just hung. So it offered a little bit of support. So even when I go to hang the new one, I can get the new one kind of hung and then level it out and screw it in. So I will give props to the last person who installed this. Good job. All right. Old heater is out and new heater is up here. So before we hang this new heater, I'm going to be removing these valves like we talked about. And that's just going to give me a little bit of play because I need to push the vent up into here because it's kind of like a slip joint. And with these, I have play, but on the hot side, I don't have quite so much. So I'm going to go ahead and get this taken out, and then all right, now it's time to hang this water heater. So we're just going to do the reverse of how we took the old one out. We're going to put that screw right here in this spot, and that's going to hang it so we can slide this vent in place kind of all at the same time. Everything's all disconnected down there, so it shouldn't be in the way. So here's to hoping it goes well. So what I'm going to have to do is take this back off, raise that screw up so all this vent can go in place. So I'm just going to rip this off the wall. right, our vent slipped in. It's all hung on the wall. Now let's just level it out and screw it in place. All right, in this box here, I have bypass valves for the bottom of the water heater, and we gotta kind of set them up. They're color coordinated, and these bypass valves are important so that you can service your water heater. Servicing your water heater is kind of like giving your car an oil change. So what happens is when your water gets heated, you have a change of temperature or change of pressure. That again happens in the heat exchanger that's kind of in this area of the water heater. So anytime you have that change of temperature or change of pressure, you have calcium that separates out of the water and sticks to the sidewalls of the tubing, kind of like, I guess, cholesterol to your arteries in your body. And so these service valves allow you to bypass the cold and the hot, and you can shut them off. That's what this is for. You can shut that off, so you have access through these to clean the heat exchanger. And that servicing should be done annually. You can either use pure white vinegar, or there's a couple different products. Haymaker makes a descaler, and you just run it through with a pump, a recirculating pump, for about 45 minutes to an hour, and then you flush it with fresh water when you're all done, and then put it back into service. So next step is to put these guys in. On the hot side in particular, there's one more step. We need to install the temperature and pressure relief valve. That's this guy right here. And that goes in this extra port on this valve. That goes in right there. And this is there so when you have a potential water heater failure, such as a bad thermostat, or something else goes wrong and the water heater just continues to run and it superheats the water, this temperature and pressure relief valve will open and discharge the water through this tubing right here. That's what this is, and this terminates outside. And it will either drip, or sometimes it opens full pressure. So it opens at 150 psi or 210 degrees. because 212 degrees is steam. So it opens just before it reaches steam so that it remains water, but super hot if it opens. You just have a union, and so I've disconnected the union, but there's a little rubber gasket in here. That's this guy right here. So that sits in here and creates a seal. So that was the union, if you remember at the beginning of the video, that we disconnected and just kind of dropped from the bottom of the water heater. So now we're just doing the reverse, but it's really important that you don't lose this. Set it aside, put it in a safe spot. I'm going to put it directly back in my box so I know exactly where it is when needed, so it doesn't get lost in the insulation up here. So I'm going to wrap some Teflon tape around these threads, usually between 5 and 8. That's on the hot side. Underneath here, there's little demarcations. There's a little H for hot, and then there's a C for cold. Make sure you pay attention what you're doing and you get the right water lines hooked up. Otherwise, you might find that it might not work very well. I mean, it still would work, I suppose. It doesn't really matter. But all the fixtures, like all your faucets, would end up being hot, like on the right side. And your ice maker would be hot, just because of the way the house is plumbed. And then I like to follow it up with a little pipe dope. So Teflon tape and pipe dope are kind of the same thing. I like to use both on most of my male threads. Everything except for gas, pretty much. On gas, I just use pipe dope. But pipe dope is just so that the fittings can get tight. It's basically liquid thread sealant. So it's so that when the brass is connected to each other, it has a little bit of lubricant there to get. So we got those two prepped out, and then we'll do the same thing on our temperature and pressure relief valve. And then once you get these tightened up, there's always going to be like a little extra pipe dope that kind of oozes out. So I take a rag when I'm all done, just wipe off that excess. Makes it look real good, nice and clean. Also, pipe dope gets over everything, and so kind of helps out the next person and they go back to touch it. It's clean. It's always a good idea to have some kind of water protection, especially for tankless water heaters, because if the more calcium you remove on the front end before it gets to the water heater, the least amount of calcium that can separate inside that heat exchanger. Most water softeners, they're going to remove about 90 to 95% of the calcium, so there's always going to be a little bit remaining. So it's still a good idea, even with the water softener, to do annual maintenance. Nothing's ever perfect or ever 100%. So if you don't like a water softener, there's a couple really good descalers that can go be attached to a water heater. And a descaler is just a device that goes and attaches right by your water heater, and it prevents the calcium from separating out of the water molecule. So that way when it gets heated, it can't separate. So some kind of water protection, whether it be a water softener or a descaler, is a good idea. All right, so we got our hot and cold valves hooked up. So our cold is going to orient something like that. This is our cold shutoff that I replaced. And I need to add a male adapter to the bottom of this. We'll do that before we hook up the cold bypass valve. And now at this point we can grab one of those gaskets and put it on the bottom side of this union, and then kind of loosely get that tight. So there's a little groove. You can see that right there. It just slips right in there, and that's what actually makes that connection or seal. Now when installing these, it's always a good idea to try to orient these bypass valves so that you can actually get to it when you need to service it. So we can hook our hoses up to these. And then when we install this one, it'll be kind of in the same orientation as the cold. So it's pointing out so it's accessible for the next person when they come back to do service on it. All right, so I'm using a fitting here called ProPress, and ProPress, all you do is get it pushed in, and you got to mark it just to make sure that if this separates, you can see the depth of where this fitting goes. So you would know if the fitting pulled out. So you can feel them push in, but then because they move, the manufacturer wants you to go ahead and mark those so you can't mess it up. So a marker or a pencil, something visual so you can see the depth of your fitting. And then the last thing that I got to do is just use my press tool and crimp those together. So now I'm going to use my press tool and I'm going to finish the cold side, and then the cold side to the water heater will be complete. This is just a pneumatic press tool. You just open the jaws and press play, and it goes ahead and presses and connects the copper together. Making sure, obviously, that the fittings have not dropped below my lines. All right, the cold water line is complete. Just need to wipe down these other fittings that I've threaded this new ball valve onto. This ball valve is a little bit redundant, but it's kind of nice to have because this does shut the water off to the water heater, and it does shut it off so you can disconnect the water heater. But now what I have is I have a valve where I can use to shut the water off. If I ever have to replace the bypass valve, I don't need to shut the whole house down. I just need to shut this guy off and drain out whatever remaining water is up here. So it's just a little added convenience. All right, so now on to the hot side. So the hot side, we got to do the same thing. I still need to put an adapter on the bottom of this hot side. While we're doing this, there's one thing that could be added to the system. It's not required in all cities, is an expansion tank. The reason why you'd have an expansion tank is because of thermal expansion and contraction. Now, the only reason you would need that is if you would have a pressure reducing valve out in the yard or on the system. So this house doesn't have it, so that's why there's not an expansion tank being installed. So wanted to clear that up for anybody who is watching and thought that that might be needed, but that's the reason why we're not putting it in on this particular. Much like the cold, we still need to put our little O-ring in, so we're not going to forget that. We'll set that in place. Much like the cold, we're going to put the O-ring inside this joint so we can get a good seal, and then we'll thread this into the top part of the union. And get these valves oriented the right way. There we go. Now the old one was much lower, so it threaded right on there. So we're going to use a coupling to make up that difference. And I'll probably have to get these water lines straight. So I'll get a measurement, and I'll probably have to take that back off so I can get everything put back together. But this will give me my measurement. 2 5/8. All right, we'll take this back off so we can get everything put back together. Careful not to drop our gasket. We'll go ahead and mark this. Where we can see it. Slip that in and then retighten our union. So that's hand tight, and I still have to tighten up the cold side because that's still hand tight. But we'll mark our fitting here. And then before we press that together, I'm going to hook up the T&P. So we're going to reuse the adapter that was on the old water heater here. On this male thread, we're just going to use pipe dope because we're going to hook it up to a flex line. And there's a gasket in there, so that's what actually is going to be making the seal. So that's why I'm deviating a little bit from like that standard that I talked about earlier. But anything that has like pressure, like standing pressure on it, is going to be Teflon tape and pipe dope. So once I press that, it kind of doesn't want to move because it's pressed in place. So I want to get this kind of prepped beforehand. I can see this isn't quite level, so I'm going to make an adjustment on that. There we go. It's much better. All right. Our fittings are all in place. That's about the orientation that I want my bypass valve. Turn that off. Grab my press tool, and then I got 3 fittings to do here. All right, so our hot and cold are all pressed together. Last thing we need to do before we forget is I need to go ahead and get up here on these unions and just get them more than hand tight so that when we turn the water on, we don't have any leaks. So now we're all ready to reinstall the gas and turn the water back on. Those are the next steps. One of the final things that we need to do here before we can turn the water on and test everything out is we got to hook up the gas. So one thing, or 2 things that we're going to add is, one is going to be a separate shutoff valve that's going to be closer to the appliance within 6 feet. And then the other thing we're going to add is this device right here. And this device right here is just a dirt leg, it's called. So when the gas comes into it, it's going to come in this way. It's going to hit the back of this T, and any sediment or impurities that are in the gas, shavings, whatnot, dirt, are going to fall down into here, as opposed to a 90, which would just send it right up into the water heater. So that's one of the changes we're going to make on this water heater installation. And this here, now our height might change, so we might have to make an adjustment with a nipple, but we'll kind of mock it up and see where we got to make that adjustment on the water heater, because we did change the height of this. That's going to change the height of the gas line coming into it. So we'll just set this here, and then we'll take our gas line that we disconnected, and we'll kind of set this up in place. There is one union that we disconnected over here. So that did change that height. So brought up another. Let's see if this one, see if we get lucky. And it's a lot closer to what we need. We'll adjust that in a minute. We'll just kind of set it in the general direction where we want to go. Now we can install the bottom half of this dirt leg. Just a nipple and a cap. The nipple needs to be a minimum of 3 inches. That's good. Now on this one, I got to remove the nipple that I cut because I kind of want to reuse this 90. So we'll take this out of here. Away. So the way we're going to set this up is we're going to put the shutoff valve on the other side of this 6-inch nipple. Can turn the gas off and disconnect the unit completely before we. So we're going to put our union here first, and then we'll need to figure out what size we need on the back side of that valve to make it to the 90. All right, now that I got my union and valve kind of mocked up, I'm going to put a level on this piece of pipe. It'll kind of give me an idea as to what size nipple I need to make up the difference between my valve and this 90. Don't worry, we'll be adjusting everything as we get things tight. So from the face to the face, so face of the 90 to the face of the valve, I have about 3 inches, and I'm going to have probably a 1/4 inch of threads going into each of the fittings. 1/4 inch and 1/4 inch plus 3 is 3.5. So I'm going to go grab a 3.5 inch nipple, and then we'll get this all threaded together. All right, so I got my 3.5 inch nipple. I'm gonna on-thread that. And this is all going to go together here, and then that'll be the final spot. So we'll just let that kind of slip out of the way. Throw some thread sealant on here. Before we put it on that 90, it'll be easier to do one side as opposed to both of them. So we'll get this nice and tight, and then we'll connect it to that 90. This moves so easily because there's a union on the other side. So once we get everything kind of aligned, we will tighten down the unions, and then we'll turn the gas on and then bleed the air out of the system. All right, that's tight, but I don't really like the orientation of my valve, so I'm going to adjust this. There we go. So this side needs to go towards me a bit. So now we'll make this adjustment here. And then on this one, it needs to go just a bit towards the other way. Again, helpful to put your wrenches the right way. All right, so now we're going to turn the gas on that original gas valve and retighten the union that's downstream on this line. I'm going to loosen this union. I'm going to throw some thread sealant on this same side, so that's all disconnected. Just want to make sure that once we turn the gas on, just trying to minimize any leaks. Get that all snug. Give it a good turn. All right, it's tight. We're going to turn on the gas. Gas is on. Now the gas is on all the way to the blue valve, so we know that all this is good. I have to come back and wipe off the pipe dope, but we'll go back and turn the gas on to the water heater and bleed out the air. Turn this valve on. We're going to bleed out the gas. You can kind of smell it. Okay, good, there it is. So we're just going to tighten this back down. Hand tight. Little backup wrench to snug it up. And then wipe down our fittings, and then the gas line is all complete. And we can go ahead and turn the water on. So I'm going to wipe down all our gas fittings, clean those up, and then time to turn the water on. Final step is to turn the water on. The water is now back onto the house. It's back onto this valve right here. So I'm going to turn this valve on. There we go. Now I still have the water off to the bypass valve, so I need to turn that on. There we go. No leaks. No leaks anywhere. Final step is just to plug this in and set the temperature, and we have a working tankless water heater. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you found this video informative. If you have any questions, please go in the comments below. Be happy to answer them. Please hit the like and subscribe and share it with your friends and family. Thanks.